telling the untold.
Welcome to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamal Thomas. I am here with my co-host, Bob Schlehuber. Let's get ready to go against the grain. We have another great show for you today, engaging, informative, and all of that good stuff. We're going to start with the relief package, establishment Democrats, Pelosi and Schumer, starting with the relief package that establishment Democrats, Pelosi and Schumer, are dubbing Rooseveltian in its scope and scale. It only took 4 other packages geared towards the 1% and several months before they actually got around to messaging for their constituents, the human beings that are in dire straits that they depend on for votes. Great. Next, we're going to get into the fascinating conversation on economics in the European Union and China, and how those governments handle the financial repercussions of the virus in comparison to the United States. Later in the hour, we'll be discussing the efforts of Nancy Pelosi and Democratic leadership to open Small Business Protection Program, a program designed for businesses to keep their employees on the payroll, to lobbyists. Yes, to lobbyists. We'll be discussing the difficulties already present in the small business program, or small businesses are having accessing those loans of that program, while larger businesses have found loopholes to get access to that cash. We'll also get into General Flynn being out and Trump crowing about it. We'll cover this later in the first hour. In the second hour, we'll be joined by friend of the show and host of Get Your News On with Ron, the one and only Ron Placone, to discuss Cuomo and Cuomo violence. Governor Andrew Cuomo was not ready for newsman Chris Cuomo boasting a new herd immunity, and apparently with 0 fracks, perfectly okay to say, to give. You're going to love this one. Also, we'll be discussing the reaction to Tara Reade by Biden supporters and the strange and deafening silence of these people who wrung their hands and breathlessly told us about Bernie Bros. Today is Friday. That means the hardest segment on the network, Come At Me Bro. You've got something on your chest, an argument, a complaint. This is your day. This is your hour. This is the moment that God himself has commissioned for you. Of course, our engineers and myself. But this is the moment to speak your piece. Come at me, bro. But let's start here. Originally, this monologue was going to be about how Democrats waited for 4 stimulus plans before finally getting around to their moonshot, the Rooseveltian plan, the FDR-style idea that is supposed to woo us. Now, they're doing this after Mitch McConnell has said, we now need to focus on the deficit, and has basically gone to lunch. But monologues are better suited for things that bug you, for things that get under your skin, for things that piss you off. And this is in the piss me off scale. I have scars. I have deep, indelible scars, not just of 2016, but of also 2020. The things they said about us, the way they talked about us, as if we, Sanders supporters, were somehow uniquely different than the other people, or the other people who were gesticulating and pushing for their particular candidates, that we were aggressive, we were sexist, we were racist, we were bros, we were a foundation of hate, as one Elizabeth Warren made the point. They treated us basically in the exact same way that they treated Trump supporters. The media ran with that and went with that for 7 months on debate stages. They would point to Sanders and say, you are uniquely responsible for your supporters, and those people are horrible. Elizabeth Warren gets out the race. What does she do? Gives a loving eye to Biden, loving eye, and turns around and attacks the person she supposedly be ideologically closest to, and tells Rachel Maddow that there is something wrong with his supporters. And Maddow said, did you talk to him about it? She said, well, he doesn't want to talk about it. It was just a fast conversation. You slandered us. You grifted us for money and votes and then slandered us. And the media went along with it. MSNBC having the woman on say, Sanders makes my skin crawl. And hopefully when Sanders is standing beside Warren, that those women would know Another one, it is even sexist to back Sanders because Warren is effectively Sanders with a vagina. And if you're willing to go with Sanders, then that means you are sexist because you're going with him just because he's a man. All of these things they said about us. And now, Biden is accused of sexual assault. And the man who they said was implicitly, sexist, they're now backing Biden to the hilt. A flagrant liar that I've proven so. Backing him to the hilt. I believe Biden. I believe Biden. Everybody to the person. Elizabeth Warren, Hillary Clinton, Nancy Pelosi, all of them. Tara Reid, credible assault claim, more cooperation than Ford, comes forward. She finally gets to talk to Megyn Kelly. Let's hear the clip with her talking to Kelly.
No. I mean, it's been stunning, actually, how some of his surrogates with the blue checks, that are his surrogates, have been saying really horrible things about me and to me on social media. He hasn't himself, but there's a measure of hypocrisy with the campaign saying it's safe. It's not been safe. All my social media has been hacked. All my personal information has been dragged through. Every person that maybe has a gripe against me, an ex-boyfriend or an ex-landlord or whatever it is, has been able to have a platform rather than me. Talking about things that have nothing to do with 1993, like even the whole thing with being called a Russian agent, that in particular, that incites people. People actually, I got a death threat from that because they thought I was being a traitor to America. And I mean, these are serious things. And his campaign is taking this position that they want all women to be able to speak safely. I have not experienced that.
No, she hasn't experienced that. She hasn't experienced that at all. She has been slandered. She's been attacked. And the Russian agent part. Here's one. Could Tara Reid have been paid by Russia to manufacture sexual assault allegations against Mr. Biden? My answer is, who knows? But in this thread, I'll outline the case that certainly makes it possible. Hashtag, I believe Biden. You've also had the hashtag, Tara Reid is a liar. This is stuff put out by Biden supporters. You've had another one, Biden surrogate, representative, comes out and says, well, her story is not credible because the female vagina is in a particular place where it's impossible for Joe Biden to do what she is saying that Joe Biden is doing. These are Biden supporters. People coming out with an article, AP, prominent lawyer, Trump donor representing Biden accuser. Now missing the point that the same lawyer represented 6 Harvey Weinstein victims and last donated to the chair of the Democratic Party, Hakeem Jeffries. All of these people have been coming out slandering her. Here's another person. Joe Biden could have raped me in the middle of Fifth Avenue and I would still vote for him before I vote for Trump or Sanders. Stop the stupid. The stupid being, stop all of this stuff about going with Joe Biden. New York Times puts out an advertisement, an article, basically saying Joe Biden needs to be investigated. The same New York Times, by the way, that Joe Biden was trying to use by sending a surrogate, Stacey Abrams, out saying that the New York Times cleared Joe Biden. After that, New York Times says, yes, Joe Biden needs to be investigated. We never said any such thing. Look on social media, on Facebook, and the things that they have been saying about her. They have been utterly gutter talk. Let's hear Joe Biden. For Mika Brzezinski. Mika brings up the weirdness in the way that you guys believe Ford, but for whatever reason you don't believe Tara Reid. Tara Reid has more cooperations. He's had 2 new people come out from the AP saying, yes, this happened. We've had a 1996 statement from a lawyer that just came out yesterday showing in legal documents, ex-husband making the point, this is, yes, she told me about the sexual harassment allegations. Let's hear Joe Biden deal with the hypocrisy of this when confronted by Mika.
Vice President, as it pertained to Dr. Ford, everyone wanted, high-level Democrats said she should be believed, that they believed it happened. You said if someone like Dr. Ford were to come out, the essence of what she is saying has to be believed, has to be real.
No.
Why?
No, what I
Why?
said, it has to
Why
be.
is it real for Dr. Ford, but not for Tara Reid?
Because the facts are look, I'm not suggesting she had no right to come forward. And I'm not saying any woman, they should come forward. They should be heard. And then it should be investigated. It should be investigated. And if there's anything that that is consistent with what's being said, and she makes the case or the case is made, then it should be believed. But ultimately, the truth matters. The truth matters.
Another woman on New York Times made the argument that it's a utilitarian argument to vote for Joe Biden, even if Joe Biden is a rapist. Because her argument was, I believe Tara Reid, but you got to do the work of real men and real women and look it in the face and says, yes, he's a rapist, but that rapist is a better alternative than Trump. And that is a utilitarian position. That is not a utilitarian position. That is a rather sad position. At some point, there should be standards. And standards should matter more than just winning any particular election. What is the level to which you're willing to say, I am not willing to go there? And there are plenty of people at this point in the Democratic Party that's not there. 30%, more than 30%, believe Tara Reid. That in no way is going to stop them from voting for a man that by their own beliefs is considered a rapist. Tom Perez says, no, I am not going to have an investigation into this. I believe in the vetting from Obama, so I believe Joe Biden. Women breathlessly went after Kavanaugh, making the argument that the allegation in and of itself was enough for Kavanaugh not to take the Supreme Court seat. And now, they're so quiet. When Bernie Sanders was accused by Elizabeth Warren of saying that a woman couldn't win the presidency, what happened? All of those people ran that for weeks. Bernie Sanders said this, Bernie Sanders said this, even when it was on stage. Why? Because the implicit idea was Bernie Sanders is sexist and he had these Bernie bros. But right now, he's being accused of rape. And all of these people are breathlessly quiet. Where were all those people who were animated about the Bernie bros? What about these Biden bros? These Biden bros are going after Tara Reid in the most disgusting, smearing ways. And all of these people who are so animated and amped up about Bernie bros, silence! There's nowhere to be found. They're quiet. Why are they so quiet now? But they were so animated back then. Bob, that's my question. All of these people who wrung their hands, oh, these Bernie bros, they keep attacking us, This woman is an assault survivor, by her own words. And based on what Democrats have said, you're supposed to believe women. And now you have a situation where they don't seem to believe women, and they seem to be okay with them attacking this particular woman. What's the difference?
Yeah, I mean, it's all around. I mean, they're also going after the lawyers that Tara Reid has hired, one being a high-profile person who is a prominent lawyer. The headline reads by AP, Trump donor representing Biden accuser. And they focus in on the lawyer, but they don't actually talk. He has donated considerable to Donald Trump. His name is attorney Douglas Wigdor. What they don't mention about Wigdor here is he's also represented 6 women who accused Harvey Weinstein, the disgraced Hollywood producer, of sexual misconduct. He also represented people who put a lawsuit towards Bill O'Reilly, as well as he spoke out to the media in favor of Christine Blasey Ford. And so here is a lawyer, Jamar. We're not even going to attacking just Reid. We're also attacking her legal staff, and they basically say, look, he's a Trump guy, and that's all they're saying, as opposed to, no, he actually helped take down Harvey Weinstein, Bill O'Reilly, and supported Christine Blasey Ford. If that's not enough, Sputnik News get a shout out here in the week. The headline here, Tara Reid's lawyers include a Trump donor, former Sputnik editor, the Sputnik editor, a former colleague of ours years ago, Bill Moran, who hasn't worked at Sputnik for years now. He simply wrote the New York Times about an AP headline trying to get it changed to be corrected, and was seemingly acted in a pro bono matter. So he's not even on the official legal team or hired. But here we go again, the media doing whatever it can to bring up Russia in order to smear a victim of an alleged crime. I mean, regardless of what you believe or not believe, clearly something did happen. To whatever extent we'll still hash out, but it's not as if there aren't some basis to what happened to Tara Reid. And instead of actually listening to her and believing her that we've been told so many times again, let's bring in Russia again. Why not, Jamal? It is a sad state of affairs that that's the best argument the Democrats have in this moment when the economy is collapsing around them and they have very little answers. Jamal, we need to take our first break here before we head into a full hour of economics in the COVID-19 moment. We'll first start looking at the U.S. economy in comparison to Europe and Asia, and then we'll look locally here at a restaurant owner in Washington, D.C., looking to stay afloat during this pandemic. And if that's not enough, don't worry, you misfits. We have a second hour for you, including our famed Come At Me Bro segment, where you, our dear misfits, can dare come at me or Jamar for anything we've said that you disagreed with. Tomorrow, I dare him. I dare him to call in 202-521-1320. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik live in D.C. We're back after this.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Shooting from the lip.
We're taking no prisoners here. Real opinions for real people. Where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to catch them out, we actually let them expand on their views. What's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
Welcome to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamal Thomas. I'm here with my disembodied co-host, Bob Schlehuber. We are going to get into some really good economic news, but if you want to call in, you have anything on your chest, the number is 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Also, like us, share us. It helps with spreading the content. So the Labor Department has reported that we've lost more than 20.5 million jobs in April, pushing the unemployment rate to 14.7%, a number that is so stark we haven't seen it since the Great Depression. To give scale, in February, the unemployment rate was 3.5%. This was, of course, more traumatic for some communities more than others. The rate is 16.7% for African Americans, 18.9% for Hispanics, and 14.2% for Caucasian workers. The Great Depression reference is unfortunately complete with the proliferation of food banks and modern bread lines, particularly in California, where area videos in Los Angeles have shown cars lined up for blocks. You must see those videos in order to get the realization of it, but lined up for blocks and rows to get provisions. Half of Los Angeles is currently without a job. Joining us to discuss the economic toll of this pandemic and how other countries are negotiating the delicate balance between protecting life versus the economy is a friend of the show and one of our favorites, John Ross, Senior Fellow at the Choigang Institute, Renmin, University of China. John, how are you today?
I'm alive, which is the most important thing at the present time. Also for people.
That is an important thing. Yeah, it's important to some degree. Yes, I agree, especially to the individual themselves, especially if they love their life. Got a question for you. So I've just given the numbers for the United States. How is Europe dealing with this? Meaning, how is the EU dealing with this economically? And for that matter, how is China dealing with this economically?
Well, they're two very different things. China is basically economically recovering. They took a terrible hit in the first quarter of the year, GDP down 6.8%. But basically, the economy is restarting. I mean, because I work in a Chinese institution, I'm in contact with people in China several times a day. And it might sound ridiculous, but in Beijing, the good news 3 days ago was there was a traffic jam because for weeks the streets have been deserted, and therefore it's a sort of strange thing of human civilization that traffic jam is good news, but it was. And I know, because I work in Beijing, I see the streets every day, but they're not 100% as full as they were previously, but they're 60 or 70% full. And you can't fake that type of information. So China has been back to not normal, it's not quite the right word, but less abnormal. In the second quarter GDP will certainly be significantly better than the first quarter GDP. The situation in the EU, it's not yet determined because, like the United States, some European countries are making determined efforts to clamp down on the coronavirus. Italy, for example, where they had a terrible situation. They've made progress. Spain's made some progress. Germany has made some progress. Because you can't deal with the economic situation until you get the virus under control, because you open up the economy legally, but people are not going to go out and spend. I mean, the last data I saw was that on US big airline flights, there are only 19 people on every flight, and on every international flight, there are 27 people. Well, you're going to be making massive losses at that. So legally, airlines may be able to operate, but actually people are not prepared to travel because they're scared of dying. So I would take the situation in Europe is not yet determined. If you take the US and China, China's recovery is going to be much stronger than the situation in the US because they basically stamped out the virus. I mean, the number of cases than 10 a day for the last 8 weeks. Whereas in the US, you're looking at 27,000 cases a day. So China is recovering economically. EU is not yet determined. US is a disaster area from the point of view of medical situation.
So that's okay. So I guess that's the point, right? I mean, you basically have to get the virus under control before you can do anything about the economic situation. Otherwise, you're going to have people dying in larger numbers as you try to force open the economy. Meaning your ideology doesn't apply when it comes in contact with reality. And reality is the virus. The economy is secondary. From the standpoint of Europe, I was reading that two things. There were two articles that came out, and it sounds like they're saying different things, but maybe not. So one made the point that Europe could break apart just because of the weakness of the euro in trying to deal with this particular crisis. Meaning Europe is not the same thing as the United States. The US can spend all of this money. We have control of sovereign currency. The EU and the various countries within the EU don't. And so you have a euro that they don't necessarily entirely control, and they don't entirely control their budgets. And so they were arguing that based on the forces or the pressures that are put on all of these various economies, it could cause Europe to break apart. But then you see another story that the beating heart of Europe, which is Germany, has done extraordinarily well and has basically kept their companies open without having large loss of life. Now, are both of these stories true? Meaning, it's one of those things that both can be true at the same time?
The situation in Europe is extremely differentiated. Firstly, some East European countries have been extremely successful. For example, the Slovak Republic has less than 1 death per million people. It's almost at Asian levels. It's been very, very successful. On the other hand, some countries are obviously disasters, like Italy and Spain. Germany at the present time is in the middle. The reason for that is slightly due to two factors. Germany has not been terribly successful at controlling the number of infections. It's very high, about 4th in Europe. What Germany has been successful in relatively is control the number of deaths. And this is due to the fact that the German health system is superb. They've got, for example, if you compare it to Britain, they've got 4 times the number of intensive unit beds, got more doctors, more nurses, etc. So therefore, the situation in Germany from the point of view of cases is not very good. Point of view of deaths, it's not as disastrous as the situation in Italy or Spain. Problem is, of course, you've got to have fantastically good health system in order to deal with this. And that's not really available in the rest of the world. It's not available in the rest of Europe. So I would say the situation at the present time, so far in Eastern Europe, most countries in Eastern Europe, great, but not extraordinarily bad. Nothing like US levels, for example. Very, very bad situation in Italy and Spain, and Germany is sort of in the middle. It will be very important to see what happens.
John, John, I was also curious to hear from you if we could go back to, say, September or October of 2019, and you could have told global economies, hey, there's a pandemic coming. It's going to cause all sorts of shockwaves throughout your systems. What's some of the advice you would have given these countries to help prepare for a pandemic? Mostly meaning that the United States was clearly ill prepared, the way in which we over leveraged debt to be able to finance other projects, that the whole thing's crumbling because it was upheld by basic nothing, gum and duct tape in many ways, the economy. What are some of the important things to have been in place to better help a pandemic in the situation we're seeing, as opposed to this complete collapse we're now seeing here in the U.S.?
The U.S. should have had an extreme lockdown. I mean, it had 2 months of what's going. The U.S., the second largest manufacturing power in the world after China, it could have produced millions and millions of testing units, personal protection equipment, ventilators, and it didn't. The death toll in the US is simply due to the fact that it had 2 months to prepare, which it completely wasted. Some countries in Europe made better use of the situation, like I mentioned in Eastern Europe. The countries like Italy and Spain didn't do so. What the data shows very clearly is what is the response of the government very much affect the death rate, and the United States has been a disaster.
So yeah, then with the economy, then speaking specifically to that, I mean, what is it that maybe Germany or China had in place that allowed that? I mean, I think of little things like if Germany had workers on their boards, which is required there, but the United States, very little worker voice when it's come to these decisions by corporations. Are there certain structural changes that the U.S. economy desperately needs to take if we are going to weather future pandemics or climate change? It seems like the worker has such a little voice in the situation at this point, and that the economy is being dragged back out there just basically to win the quarter, as opposed to think about the long-term battle and war that's taking place.
But you have different time scales. The question of climate change continues to be absolutely vital, but the question of the pandemic is a question of days. In the economy, normally the short term is a few months, it's sometimes a few weeks. But in medical terms, it can be between the beginning of the day and the end of the day. If you look at the situation of some countries like the Slovak Republic, or actually some U.S. states like Florida, which was not hit as badly as was expected, you have to act within days. The short term is hours, certainly days. And therefore, countries have to respond. And the US has completely failed to respond to this and is therefore suffering third experience in its flu.
You know, I'm curious about how Europe had to deal with their social distancing. I mean, basically, in the US, we don't have social safety net. I mean, most of us live paycheck to paychecks. You have a situation where we don't have health care, or a large number of us, or at the very least we're paying tooth and nail for it. Europe is different in the sense that they supply healthcare in many of those cities, in those states, but those people still have to live if they have to shut down companies or shut down businesses. How did they accommodate the population? Did they go through UBIs? Did they pay like 80% of their incomes? How did they ensure that their populations had cash in order to get from point A to point B during the time of social distancing?
Look, the point is the situation is extremely differentiated. If you take some countries I mentioned, like Eastern Europe, they've been very successful. Britain, for example, my own country, is a total disaster. It's got the highest level of death per capita of any country in the world. And therefore, it was not prepared. It didn't do it. I mean, the fundamental thing, if you take, for example, China, they ensured people got food, they ensured people got income, and therefore people could lock down. In Britain and other countries, they've been forced to go back to work through economic hardship. That's the aim. The aim of the people who are demanding the end of the lockdown is they want to force people back to work through and they're going to tens of thousands of people are going to die.
I've said the exact same thing about the Trump administration's strategy here in the United States. That the entire point of giving them $1,200 is to give this kind of feint to make it look like we're giving you something, when the reality of it is the goal is to starve people back to work, where they would agitate to put their own lives at risk because of their own needs. You know, we need food, we need to pay for our jobs, we need to pay for our rent, et cetera, in which case they'll agitate for something that is not in their interest. I absolutely agree with you. One more point on this, and in the same tune, I understand where you say it's it's differentiated in regards to the different countries because we're not talking about states. We're talking about each country has their own particular ideology and belief system, etc. How are they paying for that? Meaning countries that that have decided, okay, we're going to pay a UBI, or we're going to pay 80% of the amount that these people were working, or whatever the new services that were added. With each country not controlling their own currency, meaning they have euros, and with each country not controlling their own budgets, how are they increasing the amount of their budgets to pay for those particular new services that needed to be put in place in order to deal with the pandemic?
It's not actually a problem, if you want to do it politically, because they're borrowing. And at the moment, interest rates are at strictly low levels. Like, for example, in some countries in Europe, the interest rate is at the lowest level for 300 years. It's not a problem. They should just borrow. That's all. You don't have it. The interest rates, given the big economic depression that's going to come as a result of this is going to be the biggest economic hit since the Great Depression. Interest rates are going to be extraordinarily low. There is no problem if a government can borrow money necessary to subsidise the population if it wants to. The problem is some countries, like, for example, the US, don't want to. They want to force people back to work through starvation. They want to kill large numbers of people or try to get the economy going. There isn't any economic problem. I mean, in real terms, adjusted for inflation, there probably isn't any interest rate at the present time. And even if there was, it's fantastically low. So any government can finance it if it wants to.
John, I'm curious if you have a crystal ball there in front of you with our last few minutes with you. If you look out the next year or two, I'm curious the interrelationship, or what was it, Biden's phrase, Jamal, the interplay between the economies or whatever he had come up with there. I'm curious what you think about U.S. Asian intercourse, the U.S., Europe, and Asian markets. How are they going to continue to interplay with one another? And what major shifts are we going to see if Asia does come out, or at least China comes out in a position that they're relatively unharmed? You see an incredibly lagging U.S. economy right now. How are the relationships between those major markets going to change as we move into the future?
Well, this morning I was reading a report by the Economist Intelligence Unit, the data analysis thing of the Economist magazine, which is not even remotely leftist. And it's clear the balance of economic power is going to shift to the east because China and also Asia, I don't want to exaggerate only on the question of China, some other Asian countries have done very well. South Korea has stamped down on the virus. It's been very effective. Basically, Asian country, viruses, I would say, eradicated or severely under control, by which I mean you've got less than 10 cases. They're going to recover much, much more quickly than Western Europe and the United States. So there's going to be a big shift in economic power towards Asia. The economy and lives is not correct. The only way you can relaunch the economy is to stamp out the virus totally. That means you need a radical lockdown, which gets the case down to effectively zero or, tiny numbers. If you relaunch the economy with thousands of cases a day or tens of cases a day in the US, you'll have an economic disaster. So therefore, the balance of economic power is going to shift towards Asia. That's what's going to happen.
Yeah, it is an incredible process that will play out here. Jamal, it's interesting. You think about some of these comparisons to World War II and how the U.S. came to dominate after that. But I'm curious if you kind of see the same thing happening in reverse a little bit here if the U.S. isn't able to get a grasp.
Yeah, it does look that way, doesn't it? Where you have a situation where, like in World War II, one of the exceptional, going back to the weird, the exceptional stuff, well, Europe was devastated after 2 world wars, the first one and the second one. And the United States, for the most part, wasn't. And that just wasn't devastated by it. We were able to beef up our industries and so forth based off of the war needs. I mean, keep in mind, we were supplying our own war industry, putting ships on both sides of the globe, like becoming a superpower all at once. And we were giving weapons and munitions to the USSR, or Russian Soviet Union at the time, and Europe. Like, that's a massive aspect of industry. And so, you have this situation where, all right, the U.S. was able to dominate based on Europe being destroyed. But what happens when the U.S. gets devastated by something like a virus that shuts down the economy, where you have like 14, like Great Depression level chaos, and the other country is untouched. Do you get the same thing?
Yeah, well, let's continue to talk about the local economy after this. We are unfortunately out of time with John Ross, a senior fellow at Chongyang Institute, Renmin University of China. John, where can people find more of you and your work online?
I have a website called Learning from China. If you Google it, you'll easily find it. Or go to John43 on Twitter.
Fantastic. John Ross, thank you again for joining us. With that, we turn to a quick break before looking at the local economy and the response to the pandemic by restaurant owners here in Washington, D.C. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik live in Washington, D.C. We're back after this.
Tune in to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker for the latest news, commentary, and political analysis. What's really behind the political and social crisis gripping the United States and the world? Forget the spoon-fed soundbites from the pundits who know so little about so much. We bring you independent experts, analysts, and activists. Learn what really makes the decision makers take from the boardrooms of Wall Street to the West Wing of the White House. Here is where the people fighting for change speak and are heard loud and clear, 5 days a week on Radio Sputnik and SputnikNews.com.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlehuber here, kind of sort of still with Jamarl Thomas as we continue to bring live programming to you daily, Monday through Friday from 12 to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here on Political Misfits. Give us a call, 202-521-1320 if you have anything on your mind. The economy is where we continue our discussion now. We're joined by independent restaurant owner Chef Jeff, who has been in business in the D.C. area for nearly 20 years. Chef Jeff, thank you for joining us.
It's good to be here.
Hey, it's great to have you on the show. I had the great opportunity to frequent your restaurant near American University several times with my mentor, Professor Bob Cincina, so it's a real treat to have you on despite the heaviness of the conversation and the moment. Thank you for being with us. Chef Jeff, I'll start here. I would love just to hear your own personal story the last few months. Can you tell us a little bit more about your businesses here in Washington, D.C., if you've had to scale back your work, if you've had to lay off workers, and what the engagement has been like with the local and federal government to find some relief here in this moment?
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, this has been sort of just a economic and an emotional roller coaster over the last, since like sort of the first week of March when, COVID starts hitting and, sales start plummeting. On March 16th, the mayor shut down, in-restaurant dining. And so that was really tough in that first week. We've got multiple restaurants and, we basically tried the sort of takeout model or kind of worked for two restaurants. One restaurant saw $40 in sales on that Tuesday, March 17th. So we had to make the sort of tough decision on that Wednesday to lay off a lot of people. We laid off hundreds of people. We rehired 15 people to try to get the two restaurants up and going. We basically made it so everybody was making $18 an hour, sharing tips, front of the house, back of the house, all sharing. My corporate team took huge salary cuts, and we sort of got going. We started selling stuff in the pantry. We started selling gloves. We started selling bleach. We do takeout and delivery. That was what I sort of called the grinding phase there for the next 4 weeks, where we just tried to, we ended up hiring a few more people. We ended up, after about 3 weeks, being at about 50 employees. And then something happened. We had applied for, a number of federal relief programs and some local relief programs, and we actually got the Paycheck Protection Program money on Easter Sunday.
What were you able to do with that? What kind of support was that able to bring to your business?
It was an enormous amount of money because it's calculated at 2.5 times the average monthly payroll from 2019. And restaurants are very low margin, but a lot of people money. It's high labor type of thing. It represents 30 to 40% of our profit and loss statement. So chunk of money. And it was almost shocking to it just up. There was no notice about it. The money just goes into your bank. And the program, you basically have to spend 75% of it on your payroll in the next 8 weeks, and the clock starts ticking from the moment the money drops into your account. Also spend some on rent and utilities, but 75% of it has to go back to your employees. And this sort of really created a surreal economic fairyland because in the next week, we hired 190 more people. And I used drivers, flyer distributors. I got people washing cars for our customers. I've got safety and sanitation crews. I literally had to hire people to hire people. I even hired myself. I haven't taken a salary in about 3 or 4 years. So for the first time, I got a paycheck in a long time.
Yeah, I mean, it's remarkable in some ways, as poorly as this PPP program has been at actually getting money to people. Then you hear a success story of somebody like you who's actually able to get that money, but then it's kind of this overwhelming, not necessarily the most thought out process. And I was really interested in many ways about the local response here in Washington, D.C. And it was very confusing to me because the city basically said to restaurants, go ahead and lay off all your people and direct them to unemployment benefits. But what you soon realize is that people still needed to eat, and people needed to eat actually more frequently in the neighborhoods they lived in because they no longer were going to work. And for me, it seemed like the government was not thinking how they could support small businesses and individuals. It was more concerned about how they could support developers, landlords, and the wealthiest interest here in the district. And so you had this huge mismatch all of a sudden, all these unemployed workers receiving money from the government, but then all these essential services not taking place, and then the government hiring major corporations to fill some of those gaps. And so it showed the disconnect, I thought, between government and small businesses and those who the small businesses serve. I'm curious with your perspective on it, what that kind of chaos was, because people were still reaching out to you for either jobs or food.
I mean, really, to me, our experience was the employment offices were so overwhelmed by all the, restaurant people, hotel people, on a low wage earners, they just could not get through. And, weeks into it, they had not received anything. And so about 4 weeks into it is when we received the money, and then we just started hiring people back, and people were very excited to come back to work. That's sort of our experience with it in terms of the unemployment offices.
The unemployment offices, I'm glad you bring that up. One of the articles that came out recently said, I think it was 70% of the people weren't getting their unemployment just because of the way the systems were broken down, and depending upon which state you were in, it was worse in some states than others. And you mentioned also that it was somewhat like a fairyland in the way that they just dumped all of this money into the account. And it was like, all right, we need you to spend this money in 8 weeks. It doesn't sound like that's a positive experience. It sounds like that's more of a, okay, we need to throw money at this problem, and here you guys go out and do X or Y with the cash, as opposed to trying to, I guess, maintain the workers on salary and paying it out that way. Is it one of those issues where the restrictions that they put around it didn't necessarily make sense in real terms in the way that restaurants or in the way that those small businesses operated? Is that what I'm understanding? That's what it sounds like you're saying, but I could be wrong. I'm just trying to check.
I don't think it was strictly ideal for the restaurant owners. I do have to say that it turned out to be a very, very good thing for the employees, because they were having trouble getting unemployment. They were having trouble getting some relief. All of a sudden, they get hired back. Money goes into their pockets. You know it's an 8-week sort of fairyland period. So I feel like it's a really good thing for employees. The program is called Paycheck Protection Program. So I do feel good. And there was a sense of relief for me and a sense of responsibility that these people that have worked for me for a long time going to get some money back in their pocket.
Excellent.
Chef Jeff, I'm curious what the conversation is there between you and other owners of restaurants in Washington, D.C. as we move forward. As you mentioned, that money will last for the next 2 months, but we are seeing plenty of reports out from the CDC suggesting that restaurants either keep customers waiting in lines outside of the restaurant, that you have to cut down seating within your facilities. And obviously people here in Washington, D.C., I think are not going to be rushing back out in the large masses that they once had to support entertainment and the restaurant industry. How are you thinking about what's taking place over the next 6 months or even a year period?
It's tough to that way, D.C., because, the mayor's taking a hardcore line in terms of seeing 14 days of declining infections. And, we just haven't seen that at all. I think she reported today that there was like 275 infections, and yesterday there was 140 infections. So I'm not optimistic about being able to operate restricted seating here anytime soon in Washington, D.C., or even in the sort of, area, even up in Maryland either.
And how have you worked with other business owners? I mean, is there a new kind of sense of camaraderie of different folks leaning on one another to meet the needs of the time?
Kathy Hollinger and the Restaurant Association of Metropolitan Washington has been great in terms of communicating information out. I've been texting with my neighbors, Larry Law, who owns Miwa. He got the PP money, and he's actually opening right now. So, I mean, and social media, we've been sort of, going back and sharing information. There's a Facebook page for people. There's almost a false narrative going on right now that as these restaurants, they rehire and open, the food writers and the general public are plotting that these restaurants are opening, but it's a time bomb ticking. It's a temporary situation, and I'm worried about July. I think that's when the PPP money will basically run out for everybody.
Yeah, and a lot of the models here in Washington, D.C., the goal was to push back the peak of the outbreak as far as you possibly could to be able to find enough hospital beds and different spaces, and that was predicted June and July. And so the peak in many ways is yet to come here as we see how COVID-19 continues to impact the DC area. So it will be interesting to see once we do hit those 2 weeks of decline, how quickly people are going to be able to rush back out. Chef Jeff, I'm curious if you could leave us just with a little bit more about how our listeners could either support the work you're doing or how you think individuals can help support small businesses in DC and across the country.
And I think everybody should continue to order their takeout and their delivery from their favorite local neighborhood restaurants.
Yeah, I think that's an absolutely great plan. And if you want to organize your community, I think one of the opportunities, and we've been trying to do this here a little bit in Columbia Heights here in Washington, D.C., is pool people together to support small businesses, saying every Tuesday, let's order from Chef Jeff's restaurant or other restaurants and actually get people to collectively lift up a few of those small businesses. So please go order your meals and help support people there in your local neighborhood. Chef Jeff, thank you so much again for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks, all. Nice talking to you.
Fantastic. With that, we turn to a quick break. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik live in D.C. We're back after this.
By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality, to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind: color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlehuber here with Jamarl Thomas. We got one more story before the end of our first hour. We'll be back with a second hour. So don't worry, stay tuned with us here. I didn't know where I was going there with Jamarl Thomas. We have such a packed second hour. I was going to start breaking it down, but we only have 10 more minutes to get this one last story in here, and I wanted to do so. So a little bit of a brain jam. Let me get to that story here that I just teased. I don't even want to go back here, Jamar, but yet here we are again. Let's title this segment, Why You Shouldn't Believe the New York Times or the FBI. Today's version involves the one-time, for 1 second, National Security Advisor to Donald Trump, General Michael Flynn. I'm sure many of you out there have already seen the news that charges against Flynn for lying to the FBI have now been dropped by the Justice Department, despite Flynn having already pled guilty to the charges. In response, Democrats and liberals threw a fit of epic proportions as yet another pipe dream of a connection between Donald Trump and the all-so-scary Russians crumbled in front of them. One New York Times headline read, quote, "Never seen anything like this." Experts question dropping of Flynn prosecution. Never seen a white guy in America get off that's in positions of power. Never have we ever seen this. Well, this is exactly right, New York Times. We have never seen anything like this. We have never seen a U.S. president dragged for 3 years by mainstream media over an electoral issue such as this. This was the first time that for 3 years, mainstream media, despite any true understanding of what actually happened between Trump and Russia, published report after report citing unnamed intelligence officials saying that they had once and for all the smoking gun. At best, Democrats found one of those toy guns, Jamarl, and upon firing it, it shot out the message, "You're a bunch of idiots." That's the only gun they ever found along the way. Anyway, back to Flynn here and the FBI. We reported, Jamarl, last week on this show that the new FBI records on the Bureau's interviews with Michael Flynn while he was Trump's national security advisor showed that the Bureau, going into an interview with Flynn, was still trying to figure out what their goal of the meeting was. FBI notes from the day they interviewed General Flynn show questions like, quote, what is our goal? Truth, admission, or get him to lie so we can prosecute him or get him fired. The notes show that the FBI had no idea why or what the goal was for interviewing Flynn, and now yesterday the defense seized on just this. Acting U.S. Attorney Timothy Shea, in his motion to dismiss the charges, wrote the FBI's agents' questioning of Flynn, quote, was untethered to and unjustified by the FBI's counterintelligence investigation into Mr. Flynn. Prosecutors said that the case fell short of the legal standard that Mr. Flynn's lies be material relevant to the matter under investigation. Shea went on to write, quote, the government is not persuaded that the January 24th, 2017 interview was conducted with a legitimate investigative basis and therefore does not believe Mr. Flynn's statements were material even if untrue. Shea and the DOJ go on to argue that there was no material basis for the FBI to have even spoken to Flynn in the first place regarding anything they were looking into regarding Trump and Russia connections. The DOJ points out that the FBI was listening in on the calls between Russian diplomat Sergei Kislyak and Michael Flynn, and the FBI listening in knew that the calls between Flynn and Kislyak had to do with an alleged 2017 UN motion by Egypt that would have condemned Israel's continued building of settlements. So if the FBI knew Flynn was speaking to Russia about Israel at the behest of Israel vis-a-vis Jared Kushner, why did the FBI go to speak to Flynn about, quote, Russia connections to Trump getting elected? The FBI clearly knew that this is not what was happening, but instead on their fishing trip went to Flynn instead. lucky for them, Michael Flynn is an idiot as well and got caught lying to the FBI over things he shouldn't have lied about. But that aside, the interview, the DOJ is arguing that Flynn's guilty plea should have never even happened. Federal Judge Emmett Sullivan in Washington is overseeing the case, will now decide whether to dismiss it or close off the possibility that Flynn could be tried again for the same crime. So Jamarl, basically, they should have never gone and interviewed Flynn in the first place. And when they went and interviewed him, he did lie. But the fact that he lied is inconsequential to the fact that that interview should have never taken place in the first place. So a little confusing, but it's one of these stupid situations. And I really hate being a political misfit at times, because here we are having to defend the Trump administration and somehow defend General Michael Flynn because liberals love the FBI and think the FBI is great. And so obviously, you go to post and talk to people about this and they just think, oh, you're just a Trump backer. But I'm basically procedural. If you care about the rule of law, it's not that the DOJ is letting Flynn off the hook here. You should be concerned that the FBI will just go at any point, interview you, and basically make up or force you into certain guilty pleas and in certain positions that have nothing to do with anything if they want. Is nobody going to ever call out the FBI in this whole situation?
Yeah, this is disturbing on a few fronts. And, whether it's Republicans or whether it's liberals, they have this thing of, well, if you don't like the guy, you shouldn't care what happens to the guy. As if rule of law and standards don't necessarily matter in this process. It's kind of like a cop stopping somebody and they find pot on the person in the car and they take the person to court. And then the judge is like, well, look, you really didn't have a credible reason to stop him at all. And since you didn't have a credible reason of stopping him at all, the fact that he has pot on him is irrelevant to this process. We're letting the guy go. Get the guy's pot, let him out. It's that. It's basically saying, look, you had no right to even go to Flynn for a topic that had nothing to do with what you were searching for. You're basically looking for a way to go after Trump. That's basically where this is going. And it's like, if you didn't have any legal basis to go after Flynn, then it's irrelevant if Flynn lied to you because you shouldn't have been talking to him in the first place about this issue. Also, the fact that this was about Israel building settlements gets lost in this. That part also continues to get lost, Bob.
I can rant again and again on the fact that Israel has a huge influence on U.S. elections, but nobody seems to have any problem with that. I don't share the values of Benjamin Netanyahu's government and his project there that he has in Israel. So why am I supposed to just allow him and his government and their interest to corrupt my American democracy? And I obviously with air quotes around American democracy at this point. But if we're concerned about Russia doing this, why would we not be concerned about Israel doing this? They're no better actor in the world. If anybody wants to try to argue with me that they somehow are better actors than Russia in the global world, that's insane. That's absolutely insane. Nobody is saying that Israel continuing to have an occupation of the Palestinian people is somehow a good and just moral endeavor that I'm supposed to somehow back as an American because they're our greatest ally in the Middle East. And then it all seemingly gets lost tomorrow because people have short attention spans. People are now in this COVID-19 moment. People are going to turn towards the election. And here we are again here at Radio Sputnik, basically telling the truth all day, every day, covering these stories in depth and giving accurate reporting. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter for people because they're obsessed with the New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, MSNBC, and their confirmation bias that they'll continue to go back to those outlets despite yet again more news that this whole Russiagate thing was just made up and it was a fishing expedition by the FBI against Trump.
It was a hoax. And it was a hoax played on the entirety of the American population for 3 years. I mean, basically, Hillary Clinton wanting to find opposition research on Donald Trump. And then, you have the Obama administration, you have people who are friendly to the Democratic Party who are in these various branches of the FBI and whatnot, who are close and chummy, and in the political space and in the media space. And when one hollered, everybody else joined in the chorus. And the moment that they leaked that information out, there's an interview between Rachel Maddow and Richard Engel. And Richard Engel says, this stuff has been floating around and they've been trying to get us to cover this story, talking about specifically the story of Trump and Russia. And he basically says, I haven't been able to find anything on it. Rachel Maddow says, really? He says, yes, I haven't been able to find anything on it. We've told them to come out, do the interview, and give us the information. They don't have anything. And for 3 years, Rachel Maddow went with this point when in the beginning she was already told there was nothing here. Like, they talked about this story and they talked about it so much that the public just took it as being, okay, it has to be true because otherwise they wouldn't talk about it this much. And yet one plank after the next falls apart.
One plank One plank after the next falls apart. Yes, indeed. Jamar, let's leave it there for the first hour of news, politics, and culture. I need to go bang my head against the wall for a minute here while we take a break. But don't worry, after the break, we have a second hour of today's show. We'll talk about some Cuomo on Cuomo attacks, Joe Biden's efforts to use the internet, and more specifically, the internet to win a presidential election. And we have our weekly Come At Me Bro segment at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. All of that and much more. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik live in D.C. We're back after this.
Listening to Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, the show that goes against the grain. My name is Jamal Thomas. I am here with my co-host Bob Schlehuber. A lot of you who are on the radio can't see what I just did, but I was doing basically 2 and 3 things at once by bringing up my next guest's picture on the screen while also doing the intro. I'm going to pat myself on the back on that one. We have lots to cover this hour, including Tara Reid finally getting her time to talk on national television in an interview with Morgan Kelly. And of course, we have our famed
Megyn Kelly. I know we've all
Megyn.
forgotten about her.
Calling her Morgan. Thank you, Bob. Megyn Kelly. And of course, we have our famed Come At Me Bro segment where you'll get into the grievances. Anything that you have that has been bothering you about something myself or Bob has said, this is your time, this is your moment to get it out. Get it out to the world. One of my favorite segments. As always, your calls and tweets are appreciated. You can reach us at 202-521-1320. And if you haven't hit that like button, please do if you are indeed digging the content. So usually I have a really long intro, but I want to just bring in our guests because there's a lot to discuss and I want to have some fun. It's Friday. So for the next hour, we are joined by our friend of the show and host of Get Your News On with Ron, the one and only Ron Placone. Ron, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me again. I always love being here. And you know what? We should also point out real quick, Morgan Kelly is actually Megyn Kelly's twin sister. And Morgan Kelly's a huge lefty.
Really? How weird is that? How weird. They went with the M name on both and one ends up being the lefty.
Yesterday. I got confused yesterday about Megyn Kelly being Charlize Theron because I watched that Bombshell movie and I got confused because a lot of white women with blonde hair all look the same. But I think we're very confused with what happened. But I don't think she's not the center of the story.
So I got it. We got to get into the first one because the first one tripped me out to no end. And I was like, we have to do this one with Ron. So Chris Cuomo is back on his perch at CNN after a lengthy period of being infected with the coronavirus. Cuomo told us of a fever so vicious that he had a mystical experience communicating with his dead dad and chipped a tooth. Now, where Cuomo is back and is feeling his herd immunity, I'm not sure what's in the water at CNN, but he is pulling a Don Lemon and has gone on air with zero fracks, Battlestar Galactica reference, perfectly fair, fracks to give. He really doesn't like the other Cuomo, that being Governor Andrew Cuomo, and he is not shy about getting across his grievances. So let's hear the clip with Cuomo on Cuomo violence. Play the clip.
I'm a fan of Ellen. To do Ellen's show was a pleasure for me. I'm a big fan of Ellen. Yes, she said nice things about me.
Yes, she did.
Which she didn't say about you, but she was just telling the truth. And nothing about me has changed. I haven't been in the basement. I haven't had my wife shear my hair out of resentment. None of that has happened to me. I'm just doing my job, which is what I've always done.
The word from the governors and the consortium is great idea, like working with you on the policy level. You talk about yourself in the third person. True or false? It's not a denial. True or false? That you say Cuomo thinks, Cuomo says we should ask Andrew. Are you sure?
False. False.
Do you think that you are an attractive person now because you're single and ready to mingle? Do you really think you are some desirable single person and that this is not just people's pain coming out of them?
Oh,
I think beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
that's epic.
Listen to you. You got an answer for anything. You're feeling pretty good about yourself these days, aren't you?
Now, at first I was like, there's no way that's real. That's a real clip. That really happened, Ron. That really happened. He was like, you feel pretty good about yourself during this pandemic, don't you, buddy? And it was just that animosity on both sides. Ron, what's going on between these two?
And I mean, you know, I come from an Italian American household, and you know, families like to bust chops a lot. That's a pretty common thing. But I guess they're taking it to a whole other level, and they're doing it on TV. I don't know. I think there's also a chance it could be a totally meta thing, and Fredo Cuomo's job is to be so annoying that he almost makes Andrew seem likable.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think both of them came off weird here. I mean, people have been giving Governor Cuomo a lot of credit, a lot of props, missing the point that he was attacking Medicare and all of this stuff. He's the guy who signed the thing where they were killing the ballot in New York. I mean, all of these liberals who hate Donald Trump literally just lumped onto him as, hey, let's push this guy up because he seemed to be doing a competent job in New York. Like, it's amazing how fast they're willing to jump from this person or that person as long as there's some level of opposition to Trump, not even really caring about the policies of the person.
Now, I'm curious what you guys make of the legacy of Mario Cuomo, who I think in many ways was much more progressive, even though we now know that word progressive is a stupid word that means nothing. But he was to the left of his two sons here. It's just fascinating to see kids of wealthy, well-known politicians kind of follow the track, but also become more conservative in many ways. I mean, it is an interesting family legacy, to say the least.
Yeah, that's true. And also, like, think about him getting his 15 minutes. I mean, that happened in New York with Andrew Cuomo, and that happened here in California with Gavin Newsom as well. And I'm not a fan of either one. I'm not a big fan of Andrew Cuomo. I'm not a big fan of Gavin Newsom.
But Ron, on Newsom, his kids are pretty cute, though, no? Let's get focused on what matters nowadays. His kids are adorable.
Never seen a photo of his kids. I know, but I mean, he's a good-looking guy. Like, Gavin Newsom's a good-looking guy. I'll give him that. You know, he's got great hair, so kudos to him for that. But
sure.
But no, I mean, Andrew got all that credit when, you know, as Jamal, you already pointed out, he cut Medicaid. He has been screwing over the homeless in that city a lot over the years. I mean, one of the times he passed this horrible legislation on New Year's Day. So he didn't prepare as well as he should have for this. I mean, given populated New York is, he should have been preparing way before California, and he didn't. So got all this undeserved credit just because he talked nice when the cameras were on. Similarly, Gavin Newsom was given all this credit. He was just listening to scientists, doing his job, which, yeah, I'm glad.
Believe it or not, Brian, that's actually a pretty high bar. I mean, well, that's opposite, actually. It's a low bar. I'm saying it's a high bar because that's not what many of these governors are doing. Like the very instance of saying, hey, scientists, what should we do? We should social distance, otherwise we're going to get people killed. Okay, let's do that. That should be one of the lowest bars. like you shouldn't get credit. That's like saying I take care of my kids. Well, they're your kids, right? You're supposed to take care of your kids. I'm curious about California, though. In Los Angeles, I've seen these lines where these cars are like in opposite, like rows after rows after rows of cars. And in Los Angeles, 50% of the people lost their jobs, like not having work. How is Newsom getting so much credit when California and various counties or cities in California are that devastated? I mean, that's astonishing.
Yeah, well, he's getting a lot of credit because of the whole ventilator thing. That was like a good TV moment for him. And again, just like Cuomo, when the cameras are on, he sounds strong in his convictions. He sounds assuring. Meanwhile, simultaneously, a lot of places in California are suffering a lot, and there's not enough being done at the city level. I mean, especially here in Los Angeles, you do have near 50%. Like almost half the people have lost their jobs, and they're not. There have been protest after protest in front of Mayor Garcetti's house to do something about rent, to do something about a rent freeze, a mortgage freeze. Nothing's being done. And simultaneously, getting it back to Newsom, while all this was going on, he also approved, I believe, 24, or might have even been 25 fracking permits in the state. And he also neglected one of the nearby cities in California, Riverside, while he was sending all these ventilators out. They were under-equipped, so he kind of neglected somewhere in his own backyard, so to speak, just because he was enjoying all this national attention. So, the whole governors getting their 15 minutes of fame thing has been it's been an annoying news cycle, to say the least.
I have the America Riverside, the band America. Their song Riverside is on my in my list, on my playlist. It's a travesty that he allowed that to take place. If nothing else, you got to give Riverside their ventilators. I'm curious. Also, additionally, what is California doing about all of this stuff? Like, have there been additional protests? You said there have been protests in front of in the mayor's house. Have these protests gotten to the point where they start to organize larger protests? I mean, if you think to yourself, half of the country has lost their jobs, or half of Los Angeles. That means that those people did not have cash in order to pay either rent, car, food, any of those things. All of that's off the table with their jobs gone. And if they are representative of the rest of the nation, 50%, and again, this depends on where they are, the level of profit and wealth and everything else in that particular area. But if 50% is missing, don't have enough money to get from point A to point B, meaning paycheck to paycheck or $500 in the bank, those people are in desperate straits. Have those protests gotten to the point where they've gotten larger and more organized and trying to press for either freezing of rents or having some kind of relief in regards to some kind of UBI, even if it's statewide? How have the people responded to this level of deprivation?
I think it's definitely growing. I mean, there's a couple organizations. I believe the People's City Council is one of them, and then there's just the rent strike movement in general, which is national but has a big presence here in Los Angeles. And what they've been doing, also I'll point this out because I've participated in a couple of these protests. The protests are done by social distancing. The protests are done in cars. So what you do is it actually takes place outside of Mayor Garcetti's house, and there's a driving route. You kind of get in line with the other cars and you follow that driving route. And then the people who are kind of outside talking to the press and whatnot have you are organizers of the protest, and they're social distancing as well. But if you just want to participate and you're not one of the organizers, you are asked and instructed to stay in your car and follow the driving route at this social distancing. So, which kind of, hey man, as someone who's lived in Los Angeles, that makes me feel pretty good because, if kind of being in a car where you're not moving anywhere for a while is protesting. I've been protesting for a long, long time, didn't even realize. I don't feel like I did some good.
So let's pivot. Let's take a hard pivot. Tara Reid. Tara Reid finally gets to sit down on mainstream media, and she talks to Megyn Kelly. Megyn Kelly has the best lighting in the business. And as they have this conversation, I played a video in the beginning. Tara Reid basically talks about how bad she felt when all of these people basically abandoned her. And people who she cared about, who she looked up to, like Stacey Abrams and some of these other people. She's a Democrat, and they basically threw her overboard. Not just, I believe, Biden, but I think she's lying. That's how bad it was. The Monmouth poll on CNN made the point that roughly 4 in 10, 37%, said the allegations is probably true. Meaning we believe her. We think he's probably a rapist. While 32% says, yeah, I don't believe he's a rapist. Not true. And another 31% with no opinion. I don't have an opinion on the topic. I don't take a position. Now, I don't know who those people are. It's fair to say that it's impossible for me to know which is which. But to say probably one way or the other is a different question, right? I mean, probably is not a 0 or 1. It's just if I had to lean 0.1 or 0.2 in a particular direction, I'd go this way or that way. So those people say, yeah, I don't even want to question. Now, the catch becomes all of the chaos, all of the attacks, all of the, injuries that have gone into attacking this woman, putting her information out, doxing her, listening to ex-boyfriends, anything they could find to hit this woman with, they have gone after her. Now, compare that to Kavanaugh. Now, how does it feel as a Bernie supporter who you are supposedly racist, sexist, a bro, a foundation of hate, and to now compare and contrast that with all of the stuff that people have been saying about Tara Reid, a Russian asset, and everything else? And it combines into this weird dovetail of the people who are supposedly backing women because of all the Bernie bros and all of this talk that now are absolutely silent with nothing to say. Ron, how do we square that circle in regards to all of these Democrats who cared so much about Kavanaugh, but not so much about Tara Reid?
I mean, the hypocrisy is just glaring. And now you see terms getting thrown around on Twitter, like referring to, the people who are just smearing her and completely dismissing her and dragging her name through the mud. They're being referred to as Blue MAGA and stuff like that. And,
Blue MAGA. That's funny because it's appropriate, right? Blue MAGA, Make America Great Again. Blue. It's like they want to basically. Oh, I see what you mean. You mean the people who are defending her being called Blue MAGA? Is that what you're saying?
No. Like the pro-Biden camp is being called Blue MAGA.
Wow. Are they appropriating that name themselves, or is that what people are calling them derisively?
You see it a little bit of both. I mean, it's just something people say on Twitter. It's not really something I personally engage in. It's just something you see. But I have also seen the media being totally complicit in so many ways. Like I saw this last night with an AP headline. They pointed out that her attorney, the attorney who wants to defend her, gave money to Trump, which he did. He was a Trump owner. But they didn't bother mentioning, and I know you can only mention so many things in a headline, but the headline they ran with was, this is a Trump guy, and he wants to support Tara Reid. What this guy has also done in his career, which they didn't bother mentioning, first of all, also given money to Democrats. A. B, he defended, or he represented six of Weinstein's accusers. Something else this guy has done in his career. He's represented six of the people who were coming out against Harvey Weinstein. He also presented a bunch of Fox News employees who were complaining about sexual harassment. He was representing them. Also, that includes the woman who came out against Bill O'Reilly. He also has spoken in defense of Christine Blasey Ford. All these other things about this person, it's on their resume, and the headline only points out that he gave money to Trump. As that's a little more clickbaity, and that kind of suits their narrative.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be pushing that narrative. It's interesting timing. We had talked a little bit about this the other day for me, Ron, that this was the best possible moment for this to come out in many ways for Joe Biden. Obviously, it would have been best to come out immediately after, and he would have been held accountable decades ago. But if this came out right before the primary, at the height of the primary, or a week before the South Carolina election there, that could have spelled disaster for him. And if this would have came out in September, October, right before the election, I think it would have also been disaster. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I mean, at this point, they're going to throw everything at her. And no matter how much she comes forward with evidence, I don't know what's going to ever stick. There's obviously no investigation that can take place at this point. So it will play out in the public sphere. And we're starting to see the initial rumblings of it. But let's talk a little bit more about Capitol Hill and what Democrats aren't doing. I was going to say are and aren't doing. I'm not really sure quite what they're doing now that they are in a leadership position in the House. Senate Minority Leader Charles Schumer, the Democrat from New York, said Thursday that he and Speaker Nancy Pelosi will soon unveil a coronavirus relief package that he described as Rooseveltian in its scope and size. He said, quote, "We need big, bold action," Schumer said in an MSNBC interview with Stephanie Ruhle, adding that he and Pelosi are working very closely together on putting together a very strong plan, which you'll hear shortly. We're about 2 months in. We still haven't heard that plan. He goes on to say, we need a Franklin Rooseveltian type action, and we hope to take that in the House and Senate in a very big and bold way. Jamal, the Rooseveltian plan. What do you think of it?
Yeah, I'm skeptical, right? I mean, the Democratic Party has spent the last, just basically going along with everything the Republicans has pushed for the last 4 plans. And after all those 4 plans, $1,200, an unemployment package that basically many people, or most people, couldn't get access to. I think it was like 70% didn't get access to. Now, after the Republicans have gotten everything that they wanted, now the Democrats say, hey, that's right, people are desperate. We have 30 million people or more who don't have a job. We have, 14.9% unemployment rate. Let's now get around to the public after giving everything to the corporate class. Ron, why do you think? I'm asking you, why are Democrats so weak and feckless in this process? I mean, it's not just this, it's all, for the last 40 years. But now that you actually need them to do something, and I've been saying for months now that this is the moment for the moonshot. You have a crisis. Crises are always supposed to be used for political ends. They might boohoo and all that other stuff. Nonsense. All crises are used by good political figures, especially when they have an ideology about them, when they want to get something accomplished. When the Republican Party looks at this and says, hey, this is the way to get a money grab, the house is on fire, grab the purse. Well, that's what they do. That's what their ideology tells them to do. Back in 2008, what did Obama do? He protected Wall Street. That is what his ideology told them to do. And in this situation, the Democratic Party went right along with the Republican Party. They're paid by the same owner class to do just that. Now, when Mitch McConnell has said, we need to focus on the deficit, now the Democrats are like, all right, now we need to do a Rooseveltian plan when it has no plans of success. Why are they this weak, Ron?
Well, you know what? I think that has a very, very long answer. But I think the way to shorten it the best is exactly what you just said towards the end there. 2 words. Technically, it's 1 phrase, I guess. But I would say Wall Street. Wall Street is the short answer because, as you said, they have the same owners, the same ruling class owns both parties. And so that's who they decided to serve during this entire crisis. I mean, when you take a step back and you just look at what our federal government did, it essentially just had the biggest transfer of wealth up to the banks that we've ever seen, really, at least in a long, long time. And then they went on vacation, gave the money to the bank, said, you'll give it to the people. And the bank said, maybe not, depending if we feel like it. The government said, enough, and went on vacation. And as far as Chuck Schumer, and I know that it's tough to really entertain the idea maybe everything Chuck Schumer says should be taken with a grain of salt. But I'm still waiting for the big, bold plan of the Democratic platform that he promised back in 2016.
Right there. Right there. People forget about that, right? Because at one point, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer were like, they were trying to stick with Sanders to some degree. They was like, we're going to pass this big, bold workers plan. Nothing. It went silent. All of those plutocrats got on Fox News, got on CNN, started crying and said, if you mention billionaire again, I'm going to cut off your funding. And Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer shut up. Bob, you were around during that time. You were alive during that time. You remember it.
Yeah, I guess I'm always amazed too at like who this party thinks they are, as if they're like even in a situation to be Rooseveltian. They're a party that's been captured by Wall Street, as Ron, you're saying. They've been overcome by corporations funding their way into office. This incredible corporate culture that we have on the Hill. And so they think they're in a situation that they can all of a sudden just do this huge public investment when they have private corporations siphoning all of that money away from them. In like a shorter comparison too, you hear all these people fight for 15. And I was saying this to you, Jamaro, before the show, that, that fight for 15 movement started almost 10 years ago now, and that the minimum wage and the cost of living has gone up. And so it's not even a $15 fight anymore. Now it's more $20 or $25. So no matter what Roosevelt did that was great back in the 1930s, it's 90 years into the future now, Ron. And so this idea that they're just harboring back, people love to hear it. But for me, it just is more sloganeering. It's not actually learning from history. I'm somebody that believes there should have been more direct cash transfers from the wealthiest to the poorest that was done through programming, which I think is important from FDR. But there was other things that we could learn from him. But instead, Democrats just always go, FDR, got it, great, call it a day, recess.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely someone that gets pointed to a lot and for various different reasons. And I think the biggest lesson is, look, this is a guy who was, I think, on a personal level, he was a little more moderate, but he basically went to his rich friends and he said, look, you're either going to give up a little bit, you're going to give up everything, because these people are in the streets, they are kicked off, they're not going to take it anymore. I think that's what we need to learn from FDR. And when we try to, channel FDR, that's what we should be going for. We should be going for, us in the streets protesting, not literally because we got a social distance, but, like car protests and what have you. And that's what we need to do, because that's the only way anything's going to get done. Because, a bold plan from Chuck Schumer would just include decent interest rates on a loan that you can take out. So we need actual policy solutions.
Yeah, I mean, the amount of loan debt that students in this country are in right now. And so even again, if you were able to address the moment that we're in, Jamar, which is obviously not being addressed, you still have the structural problems that the vast majority of debt in this country is held by seniors, held by students or people that were formerly students with their student debt and whatever we've spent on the wars. So it's not like all of a sudden, if you're able to even rise to the occasion in this specific moment, will you have actually risen to the occasion of addressing the overall economic inequalities in the United States.
And the person who's supposed to be representing the opposition for this, Joe Biden, I call him the invisible man, because basically he is nowhere to be found. I don't know if you've seen this thing, Ron, but the David Plouffe and David Axelrod, Obama's kingmakers, were trying to give Joe Biden advice. And basically the advice was, do the opposite of what you have been currently doing. You can't win a campaign through your basement. That's first point. And they also made this thing, you got to get better on social media. So Joe Biden has been doing these virtual meetings and whatnot. So one of the first ones was the one he had with Hillary Clinton, where he fell asleep while Hillary Clinton was endorsing him. True story. That's absolutely true. I've shown the clip. He had the other one where he lost the thread and couldn't get his words out. But he had one recently that just crashed, where he was like echoes and blips and so forth. How can Joe Biden win a campaign like this? I keep asking myself. I've watched, I can't think of the gentleman's name. He looks like the Crypt Keeper. But he was making this argument that Joe Biden is going to beat the stuffing out of Trump and, we got to destroy Trumpism. Joe Biden cannot get out coherent statements, and he can't even run the basics of a virtual press conference. How on earth does Joe Biden win this campaign?
I just wanted to point something out real quick. Everybody has been giving Joe Biden a lot of flack when he fell asleep, during that live stream. But I got to be honest, I actually had another take from it. I was like, wow, falling asleep while Hillary Clinton is talking is the most relatable thing Joe Biden has ever done.
I have a hard time listening to it, too.
Yeah, what a mess of a... And it's just like they're throwing softballs to the Trump team. As Jamar mentioned there, that virtual rally, just what a mess of it. And a Trump's team spokesperson said, quote, Joe Biden's virtual rally was a fundamentally unserious comedy of errors that displayed the depths of his campaign's incompetency. Wow. Even if he had addressed his credible sexual assault allegations, no one would have been able to understand through the awful audio. If he can't run a live stream, how can he expect to run our country? It's doubling down on the same. That was like what Eric Trump's line after the Iowa Democratic primary, Ron, is he basically said these people can't even run a basic primary in the state of Iowa, and they want to somehow run the entire country. It seems like just easy pickings for the Trump team against Biden.
Oh, big time. The only way that the Republicans are able to exist the way they are, with just how on the surface repulsive all of their policies are, it's like there's not even any type of subtlety in it at this point either. Where it's just so blatantly for the 1% and who cares about anyone else. The only way they're able to exist that way because of how unbelievably pathetic the Democrats are. Because they are just such, it really is. They are the Washington Generals of politics. And this entire Biden campaign, this is not a campaign that's trying to win, really, because Democratic establishment, not saying the people here, I'm saying the establishment, Democratic establishment, they've already won 2020. Their version of winning, making sure somebody progressive doesn't get anywhere close to the White House. The day Bernie Sanders suspended his campaign, they got their wish. Now, their main concern, which is making sure that no progressive policies happen in this country because their donors don't want that wish has been achieved. That task has been accomplished. Now, if they beat a Republican, well, that's good. It looks good. If they don't, no biggie. Baby train keeps it rolling. Biden's campaign is doing the exact same strategy Hillary did in 2016, which lost. You know that the same issue that she does, meaning every time Hillary had this issue, every time she talked, people liked her less. She was not of raising her products. Whenever she talked, less people wanted to support her. Biden has that same issue. Well, do you think, when someone get a career in politics, every time they talk, like them less and don't want to support them? Maybe because they had their career handed to them by the donor class. Maybe that's why. You can find the video footage of Joe Biden over the years saying that he's ready to prostitute himself for big money. Embellishment, a direct quote.
Here's the thing, though. I think we have a slight disagreement. Well, we have two callers, but just to make a point, I agree with you that the donor class and all that other stuff, absolutely true, absolutely agree with you. But the fault here lies with the lefties. Now, I agree with you that all incentives and everything else, but the thing is, life is always going to present certain, let's say, difficulties in trying to get yourself from point A to point B. Some people have illnesses, some people have setbacks, like being captured. There's all sorts of things that interrupt in our lives, that make our lives difficult. And from the standpoint of lefties in the political space, the same thing is true. We're encountered somewhat of an intractable political space where you have a party that we've lumped ourselves into that fundamentally does not believe in the things that you believe in. And like you said, Ron, we're willing to lose to Trump if it meant stopping us. Now, I would argue that the issue here is the lefties that have, for the 40 years, got habituated into backing a party that doesn't back their interests. And basically, they've been doing politics wrong. I would argue that the issue and the fault here lies with lefties. If you set a standard, say for the moment, that lefties that lumped themselves into the Democratic Party decided our standard is that if you are going to destroy Glass-Steagall, well, the Republicans would do that. We're not backing that. And Bill Clinton lost. Would it have set a standard going forward that it is impossible to win in the Democratic Party doing this and this? But what does it mean for Bill Clinton to win when that standard is never set and you go another 4 years and another 4 years and another 4 years and Obama give 95% of the income to the top 1% and lefties still say, we got to back the Democrat? You've destroyed any notion of standards and accountability. And so when all the pressure, when all of the push is for the Democratic Party to A, realize lefties will back us because they're terrified of Republicans, and then B, oh my God, look at the cash, then there's no incentive to stop them from moving to the right. That's my argument. We have two callers. Let's take the caller real quick.
Yeah. No, let's get Ron's thought on that, and then let's take these callers, Jamal, if it's all right, in our "Come at Me, Bro" segment, because I think they're going to come at us with a few arguments.
Yeah, go for it.
Ron, I'm just curious if you have any thoughts. If you have any thoughts to that, I would only push back to Jamal is like, what are we calling leftists? Because there's communists and socialists. There's Democratic progressives, there's Democratic socialists, and then there's Democrats, and then there's like centrist moderates. And so it's like kind of a huge range. I'm just kind of curious, Ron, with your last thoughts, what you have to say about what Jamal just offered.
There is. And well, I guess in short, I mean, I do agree with that. I think it's, when the Democrats can just take the votes of the left for granted, they don't really concede anything. And we've seen that play out time and time again. We saw it happen with Clinton. We saw it happen with Obama. We in 2016, it pretty much happened. And seeing it happen again, or just, capitulating. There's really no concessions given. Oh, wait, I forgot. Joe Biden said he would lower he'd lower the Medicare age to 60. I forgot about that huge concession. My bad. As far as what the left, in the United States, our Overton window is so far to the right. I tweeted this out yesterday. Imagine, just imagine you're an outsider from, a different country or something like that, and you kind of look at what's going on in the contemporary United States, and somebody sits down and explains to you, a political party in the United States that decided that they'd be better off running an alleged rapist than running a guy who just wants to give everybody health care. They'd rather have that alleged rapist. And by the way, this political party didn't even consider it the most conservative one. Wow. So left is basically, I mean, by United States standards, anybody who thinks there should be universal health care, anybody who thinks a higher education shouldn't be dependent on the privilege you have and that everyone should be able to get a higher education. Anyone who thinks that we should do something real about climate change and not just give it lip service or nothing at all. Anybody who thinks that the wage inequality that's to the point where the CEO makes at times 475 times that of the average worker is wrong and that there needs to be something done about it. I mean, anybody who entertains those basic policies a lot of other countries take for granted is very much left of center in the United States.
Yeah. No, I mean, we had somebody on from Brazil yesterday talking about how there's multiple leftist fronts happening in the country. I was like, wait, you guys have multiple fronts when we have like kind of a half a front here, if that, I'm not even sure. But with that, we are unfortunately out of time here with Ron Placone of Get Your News On with Ron. Ron, I believe you have a new album out. Where can folks check that out?
Well, it's not necessarily new. It came out in 2018. Website.
Still new. That's still new in our book.
If you go to my website, ronplacone.com, you can find all Ron Placone stuff. And if you don't mind, I do have a show coming up tomorrow. We're via Zoom. Been doing shows on Zoom, myself and another comedian, Graham Elwood. And you can get tickets for that. They're just $5 at my website, ronplacone.com. These Zoom shows have been a lot of fun. Makes us all feel a little less alone. It starts at 8 p.m. Eastern time tomorrow night.
Very cool. Make sure to tag us at Sputnik Misfits on Twitter there, and we'll get it back out there for you. That was, again, Ron Placone. Thank you so much for joining us. With that, we are taking another quick break before coming back with our famed Come At Me Bro segment. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik Live in D.C. We're back after this.
Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts and stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamal Thomas. I'm here with my co-host, Bob Schlehuber. You hear that sound? It is Friday. Come at me, bro. This is your time. This is your moment. This is the day that God has commissioned in accordance with our engineers, myself, Bob Schlehuber, and our esteemed producer, Michelle Whitty. This is your moment. Feel free to call in at 202-521-1320. That's 202-521-1320. We have a caller on one Joe Biden. Jay, what's going on, man?
Hey, what's going on, Bob and Jamal? What's good to talk?
Not too much.
Hey, good to hear your voice, man.
So what's on your mind?
All right, so this Lift Every Voice plan, I agree with you all. It's a trash plan. Really, really horrible plan. I do agree there. But yesterday or the other day, whenever you guys were talking about it, or Jamal, you kind of made it seem as if like a part of your problem was that he was singling out black people. And I think that's dangerous. Just because we do need health care and Medicare for all and a decent job and all of that. I do agree that we black people do need these things, but we need those things as a matter of being an American. And so all Americans need those things, but not all Americans have the baggage that black people have that has led to us, our middle income earners, having less wealth than
now,
white.
I agree with you. Don't misunderstand me. I do agree with you. What would you do from a policy standpoint in order to change that? Now, because if you remember, Ajamu Baraka was on yesterday. And if I'm not mistaken, it was the same thing that came up with him where I asked him basically, what policies would you take to try to ameliorate some of kind of the racial stuff that is taking place in the country? And he didn't necessarily have an answer for that either. And I don't have an answer for that. Now, if you can tell me an answer for that, I will be there with you because I do agree with you. My issue with the singling out of blacks has less to do with policy and more to do with this. They do this sometimes in this kind of tokenizing way where they're like, all right, we're going to do something for, this disadvantaged specific community of black folks. But it oftentimes is just tokenizing as opposed to actually having some kind of real policy that...
Let me jump in and then get Jay's response. Because it was something that I thought about yesterday too. Because there are policies. I mean, when you look at education in America, that's a policy, right? And what people are learning. When I was taught at a young age, I was told the Native Americans were our friends, and that pilgrims came and they had Thanksgiving dinner where they all got together and thanked everyone. That's a policy decision that writes those education plans that then go into schools. And so right there, we could have a national truth-telling process that has been used in many other countries around the world when people have been wrong to restore some of the fabric of society. And so you could put in place dialogue groups that gave funding to local municipalities to have community conversations around the legacy of slavery and the mistreatment of blacks in America. And so there are efforts like that that are very rare and far between here in the United States, but in other countries, they've used these processes. And so you could actually give out grant blocks to address these issues and legacies of racism. And I think that's where the plan that Joe Biden has is it simply just focuses on the stuff that you're saying, Jamarl. You probably shouldn't focus on like all black people need healthcare. They need good systems. They need grants and loans and all of these things. And so I think what he was doing misses the need maybe, and that's what you're getting to, Jay, is to think critically about what are some unique and innovative policies that could address issues of race and where can we slide some of those in. I think what Joe Biden put out was simply just an economic plan that speaks to all Americans and missed any nuances that could have been brought specifically for black communities.
Reparations is the policy that will, that's just that. It's the thing that and I understand that it's not necessarily the most popular policy out, but if you're supposed to be an ally to black people, then will think that your job would be to be advocating for that regardless. And it's not about changing hearts and minds. It's just about educating people who have not necessarily thought about black poverty in a way of being separate from white poverty in very significant ways, in ways that reparations can address. So I think that that's the answer to your question, Jamal, is reparations, pushing for reparations. And also agree with you, though, that we should be pushing politicians to stop tokenizing us and using like the lift every voice plan. Like, come on, man. So like I agree that is a problem, and we should be pushing them to have more substantive, policies for black people. But I don't want to make it seem as if we don't want for politicians to be singling out black people, because black people have been singled out for negative policies for pretty much our entire lives. So, I got to go, though.
Thanks, man. Yeah, Jay, thanks for the call. Jamarl, isn't that what you would have wanted, though, from your presidential nominee? Is this somebody that would have written something and would have been like, wow, I never thought of that. That is really innovative. Yeah. That is creative. That is a policy that I didn't, and that's what this policy didn't offer. That's what the Democrats aren't offering. They're not offering you and me anything that's like, wow, this was really innovative. They have huge teams with millions of dollars of money doing in-depth research, historical analyses, all of this labor and work going into writing these policies that I would hope they would come up with a little bit better plans than what me and you, Jamarl, on our radio show could talk about. And me and you, the two of us with very little money from the Biden camp could come up with better proposals than they're offering. I think that's where I'm most frustrated. It's like you spent all this time and energy, and this is all you came up with.
You know, I'm realizing as I'm sitting here listening to you guys talk, my perspective on life is, I think, somewhat warped in regards to, I think, the way that people look at this stuff. I think it comes from, you know, I was ill ever since I was a kid. Like, even when I was younger, I had this kind of knee pain that went from the time I think I was like 12 going to maybe when I was 18. I think it stopped around when I was 17 or 18. And then when 17 hit, losing a kidney failure. And that went on for years, like surgeries for every, 2 major surgeries every 2 years, going for like 10 years. I think in my head, I look at that stuff as opposition is just always part of the process. Whether that's playing chess and you have an opponent, or whether that's life where you have difficulties that you deal with. But ultimately, there's an aspect of you that has some level of agency in trying to change that. And I think the same way in regards to the larger society. I have no expectations of Democrats any more than I have expectations of Republicans. My expectations goes into what you push them to do or what you basically allow them to do. If blacks are going to vote to the tune of 90% Democrat, then they don't want reparations. Just saying. Because basically you've given over all your political clout, your political leverage, your political power. Meaning if you want that, you have the potential to get that, but you can't necessarily get that if you give over all your power away. So yes, I agree with you. If African Americans want something separate and distinct, it is already voting as a group, meaning it's already voting as a collective. This isn't like lefties where you have to say, all right, don't vote Democrat, don't do this. You're already voting as a group. Your power is already enshrined based upon the thing that you're doing collectively. If you want that, then the way for you to do that is push collectively for that and to not automatically go over your support, even if it's not Medicare for all. I mean, even if it's not reparations, even if it's Medicare for all, where you realize that's better advantages the lower part of the economic scale, or even if it's getting rid of student debt, where again, you realize it's advantages, you're part of the economic scale, if you don't want it to be reparations so you think it's too much. I'm making the point that the power in this position is given over for free. And when blacks say, oh, Democrats are taking advantage of me, they're not taking advantage of you. You're incentivizing them to take advantage of you. They're doing what they're politically supposed to do.
Do you think that's the right framing, though? Do you think that's the right framing, is like blacks are giving over their power? Do blacks in America have power, though? I mean, they're 13% of the economy. They've been completely marginalized. Financially, they don't have power. We know big corporations have the power in the system. And so it's curious to me that when you have a vast majority of voters are white voters, it seems like the onus would be more on them than to blame a minority group.
Screw that. Blacks got Joe Biden elected. They got Hillary Clinton elected. They got Barack Obama elected. Meaning you're thinking that you have to occupy a square in order to have power. Power is also given through leverage. In the case where you're giving 90% of your support, and despite it being 13%, only 50% of the population votes.
They could have tipped the scales, but to say they got him elected, Barack Obama definitely had plenty of tens of millions of white people that also helped.
Is power. I understand what you're saying, where you're trying to say, oh, this minority group is this, and you shouldn't necessarily. No, screw that. Blacks vote 90% Democrat on a random day, which means that whether or not that small minority, that 13%, but it's a huge amount within the context of getting a person elected or not getting a person elected. And whether or not, especially if you're running in the Democratic Party, you need that vote. That vote is entirely determinative about the candidate that's going to get elected. Power is conveyed there. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the overt sense. For example, the DUP in the UK. What happened when the DUP became became the kingmaker? They had to basically take policies that the DUP wanted, whether or not the larger party wanted or not, because the government couldn't maintain itself without them. The DUP was like 13 people. It's the same process. Power is not always conveyed just in the sense of being able to take something directly. It's also conveyed in where you have leverage. And to say African Americans don't have leverage in the Democratic Party if they started to assert how they voted and what they voted on, no, they do. Minority, yes. Money-wise, yes.
Let's get another caller in here. Eric, you're on the line here. You wanted to make a mention of reparations, or go ahead and take it wherever your mind's at.
My suggestion is $5 billion and only give it to black people and black families. And then if anyone who's white gets their hands on any of this, that's fraud.
What if the person is mixed? What if there's a black parent and a white woman, like wife? Let's say a generation ago. Do they still get it?
I don't think so. But because
but they're
we're trying to...
They're black. They're still black. Why don't they get it?
Oh no, black people and black families get
No,
the
but
money.
I'm asking you, what if
but
it's mixed?
if any,
I have a family member that has a mixed kid. He's black. The woman he was messing with was white. The kid is mixed. Does the kid get the money?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, what about the kid? If that kid has a child by another white parent, by another white woman, does that kid get it?
It to them. About that, guys. Just
all right.
It's an area which I just suggest any white person gets their hands on it. That's fraud, because we've heard how the big corporations got their grubby little paws all over the money for the small businesses. So
thanks, man. I appreciate the call.
100% of the
I appreciate it.
No,
so, Bob, what about you? What do you think?
Again,
about
Jamal,
that? If a person is black, they get it. Now the catch becomes, okay, what does it mean to be black? Right? That's what the interesting question becomes.
Yeah, and this is going to wade into an area of expertise that I'm not going to jump onto.
It's
You get
not
the American
as easy as
descendants of
people
slave
think. That's my
argument,
point.
you get the generational thing. No, I guess going back to your previous point, I'll give you the last word here. Is I think unorganized people do not exert power, and so with African American communities not being organized, I think maybe they could have power, but the way in which they currently are engaged with the political system and how they've been oppressed and marginalized and fed misinformation, that power, I think, Jamal, maybe we could find an agreement on, needs to be organized if it's ever going to be yielded whatsoever. I think I'll agree with you that there is power to be had, but the way in which it's currently organized and being engaged right now, I don't think blacks have as much power as the Democrats will like to say they are. They say, oh, you guys have a ton of power. You can pick whatever you want. We absolutely need you. I think they're just saying that in a way that keeps them powerless. So maybe it's about the realization of the power that is the most important step.
It's the realization of it. It's disorganized. It's nothing. I mean, but that's like anything, right? Like the moment that you come up with some level of organization, the organization itself takes on a power in and of itself. The same thing is true with African Americans. But this is not the reason why I tend to focus on class, because this is not just a black issue. White folks also get taken advantage of, like in the political system and in the economic system. I mean, in the same way where we can say, well, this organized power for blacks. Think of what the public said they wanted. The public said they wanted health care. They said the majority wants Medicare for all. The majority wants to get rid of elimination of student debt. These aren't, fringe radical issues. These are issues that the American public said they wanted. The political process doesn't care. Now, if you had organized masses of 20, 30, 40 million people that says this is what we want, then that organized power in and of itself of white, black, gay, straight, trans, whatever, begin to be able to take on the power in and of itself and change the government. Think back to FDR. It wasn't just FDR loving people.
That's my point, though. But it's saying that if power is unorganized right now, how are we going to say if black people aren't organizing their power? How did black people tip the scales for Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden or Barack Obama? I think they were used more by the Democratic Party to then tip the scales more than black people organized themselves to then tip the scales.
I'm just making the point that in the sense of if you're looking at organization, voting for anything in the tone of 90% is organization. It's just unfortunate organization. And you might even say it's, a horse led to water to drink organization where they're not necessarily having agency in the way they're thinking about it. But let's just be clear, though. If that is organized, a large number of people voting in that number and one party in that way, especially in the southern states and whatnot, that's power. It's just given over for free.
Yeah, we'll see what it looks like come November. Tomorrow, we need to take one last break here before we get to a few more stories we wanted to slide in before the weekend. You're listening to Radio Sputnik Live in D.C. We're back after this.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines, we divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today, get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlehuber here with Jamarl Thomas. A few stories to fit in before we get out of here for the weekend. I did just want to briefly mention that there was an arrest made in the killing of Ahmaud Arbery there in Georgia. We reported on the story the other day after footage came out of the killing from last March. Father and son Gregory McMichael, 64, and Travis McMichael were taken into custody yesterday, more than 2 months after they chased down Arbery in a truck, got into an altercation with him, and shot and killed him. It was the Georgia Bureau of Investigations that made the arrest after national pressure had mounted. Jamarl, good to see an arrest there, to say the least, but obviously, again, nothing will bring back Ahmaud Arbery. So on some ends, people are celebrating, I guess, in some ways that they were able to bring some semblance of justice through this arrest. But again, I guess I'm at a loss for words of what did we actually gain out of this process?
Yeah, I mean, it's this item that you can make an argument that justice never really exists, because there's no way to ever really balance the scales. It's like you take a person and everything that made that person up, all the experiences, the memories, the love, the hates, all of that stuff, and you right off the planet. And it's one of those things where the guy did nothing wrong. I think that's the thing that's hard to reconcile for me. You're running through the street. You're an American. Americans can jog. And as you're running through the street, you are accosted by people in a pickup truck. Like these guys are back in the 50s in some kind of Klan rally. And they take the guy down as if they're fair game and doing a citizen's arrest on a guy that has done nothing wrong. Like, astonishing. Like, that this is taking place in 2020. And so, it's like there's no way to balance that. Like, there's no way to make that feel better. So what? You lock the guy up? Yes, I'm glad you locked the guy up and prosecute. But at the end of the day, there's still a process where that happened. And there's no way to reconcile that.
Yeah, it's frustrating to me, too. I guess on one good note, if you're out there and you want to draw attention to this case and continue to amplify it, people are jogging 2.23 miles today to acknowledge the day that Arbery was shot and killed, posting that online. And so if you obviously want to draw attention to that, please do. But Jamarl, for me, the frustrating thing is the way in which the media always covers these stories, right? Like the CNN, the big corporations cover this stuff as if it isn't always happening. And that's been a lot of my frustration with the COVID-19 coverage of how it's been indiscriminately and disproportionately affecting poor communities and communities of color. When you're saying to yourself, this is always what's happened, always the Arbery's of the world. White people aren't getting shot when they're jogging, and white people, again, are not being impacted the most by a health pandemic. But these stories constantly are presented to us by the mainstream media as if this is the first time it's happened. Are you so shocked that this could possibly still happen when this always happens and the media outlet themselves are complicit in the way in which they report on the news as well as their corporate nature?
Pretty much. I mean, from the media standpoint, you must understand they monetize reality. And you can make an argument that I do too, but the pennies that we get from YouTube is not quite the same thing in regards to incentive. But their job is to basically say, this is your world. But they're not really giving you your world. What they're giving you is what they consider to be interesting, important, what they consider to bring eyes, what they consider to bit people over to their particular side or in a particular point of view. It's the world kind of shaped around corporate interests. And corporate interests, again, involves profit. It is profitable to run a story because it gets into you that annoys you in the sense of running this particular story. But they also will run the Russiagate story with the same fervor. It's people need to understand the reason why media does what media does and understand that the window that they give you is just one shot of millions of other things that are taking place around the world.
Yeah, I mean, even on economics, and it's a story we've obviously touched on quite a bit today here, Jamarl, but the mainstream media tries to focus in as if the Dow Jones
That's all the economy
index
is.
And its magical count is it's like the entire economy. And we're seeing these horrific job numbers, 14%. Obviously, those numbers are being reported below what the number was 4 months ago, the real unemployment number. So it'll be shocking to see the 25 plus 30% actual numbers when you pull off the mask behind a lot of it. But Jamarl, constantly we're fed brand new story, breaking news story. I guess it wouldn't be as sexy if they simply said America's broken yet again. Let's continue to talk about this.
Yeah, isn't it so weird? You see, the economy is going up and 14.9% unemployment rate. Like, how bizarre is that? How can the economy be the stock market if all of those jobs are being lost and all of those businesses are going out of business. How? And yet that's what we're told in this kind of weird, magical way. That's kind of my point, though, right? When you're looking at the world, their lens of the world is of a particular class. These guys are millionaires, all of them, who are reporting the news. That's the framing of the world that they give you.
Well, thank you for listening to another week of Political Misfits. No millionaires on this show, Jamar Thomas. We promise you that. But luckily, we are still employed and we're able to be here with you all week. A big shout out to all of our callers who joined us this week. A big shout out to our guest, Chef Jess and John Ross, along with Ron Placone today. A big thank you, as always, to Ryan, Dimitri, Andre, and Saul, and the entire Sputnik News team for keeping us up and running. It is greatly appreciated. Shout out to our producer, Michelle Whitty. That's it for us this week. We'll be back Monday with a brand new week of Political Misfits. On behalf of Jamar Thomas and myself, Bob Schlehuber, thank you for listening. Now get back to organizing.
Guys, thank you as always for showing up. I always appreciate you guys for hanging out with us for the show. We, of course, over the weekend, we don't necessarily do the show over the weekend, but I will be around doing videos, and I would most likely be doing videos today if I can find some really good stories. But everyone, stay safe, like, share, and subscribe. Thanks all.